Hello, this is Dennis Polis. This is a response to HonestDiscussioner's video with the self-deprecating title, Spectacular Crash and Burn. I noted that HonestDiscussioner's intention was to destroy me intellectually. I thought that was rather bad form. HonestDiscussioner chose to blame his lack of self-control on me.
Normally, I am primarily concerned with the discussion. However, with you, that honestly wasn't the case. Why was that? Could it possibly be something about the way you carried yourself in your videos and your discussions that caused that change?
Apparently I'm too self-assured for HonestDiscussioner. I should be more submissive and docile and uncertain of my conclusions. But I'm not that kind of person. When I know what's true, I say it flat out, and I'm not apologetic about that. I try to be courteous with my opponents, however. Of course, naturalism is a faith. It's based on an a priori commitment to the non-existence of things other than the material and physical world.
No, it is not. It is in line with consistent observations.
My position that God is responsible for maintaining the laws of nature and operation is also consistent with all of the known facts. Moreover, the existence of God, as I showed in video 15, can be deduced from premises which are absolutely necessary for the operation of scientific thought.
And is something that is falsifiable. God showing up and performing real magic that can be consistently verified would falsify the claim of naturalism.
This sounds very reasonable, but it's not. God does magic. God maintains the laws of nature in operation. Yet this evidence, the fact that God maintains the laws of nature in operation, the fact that these can be observed repeatably, doesn't count as evidence for HonestDiscussioner because he wants something magical. Yet the idea of being magical means that it is out of the norm. At the same time that he wants it to be magical or out of the norm, he also wants it to be repeatable or in the norm. Thus, his criterion, the thing which he wants us to establish in order to show that naturalism is wrong, is self-contradictory. That's why naturalism is so irrational and is, in fact, a faith.
To say observing consistent physical laws playing out without any testable instances of supernatural causes.
This is rather like a person who has never left his own room. He looks all around the room, he's inventoried everything that exists within the room, and when someone tells him that there's such a thing as an outside world, and that the evidence for this is sound and light that he sees coming into his room, he denies it because he is certain that the light and sound which others say come from the so-called outside world will in time be explained by causes within his own room.
And therefore believing there are no supernatural causes is nowhere near believing that Jesus will one day return from heaven and reshape the world.
Yes, the naturalist faith is not the Christian faith. They're different. Christianity is based on a belief in the existence of God, and the existence of God is a proven fact. Naturalism is based on a belief in the non-existence of God, and the existence of God is a proven fact. It is logically possible, even if you might not believe it, that Christ might return at some point in the indefinite future. But it is not logically possible that God can both exist and not exist at one and the same time. As to the majority of science being on my side, there's a difference between science and scientists. Everything I say is compatible with all of the science I know.
This is true, but an honest person going against the general scientific consensus.
The problem here is that HonestDiscussioner has not shown a single point at which I've gone against the scientific consensus. What I have gone against is the naturalist spin on science. After some preliminary noises about being unable to purchase my book, which my website makes perfectly clear is still in preparation and unpublished.
Yes, the homepage of his website does, towards the bottom of the page, say manuscript.
Yes, it's possible to miss that. But the problem is that he chose to criticize me for my book being unpublished. If you're going to criticize somebody, you better be sure about your facts. He then goes on to make the excuse that Wikipedia doesn't tell him that my book is unpublished. Any scholar knows that Wikipedia, while it is often useful, is extremely unreliable. I myself have never looked up my own Wikipedia page, and so I take no responsibility whatsoever for it. I do take responsibility for my website.
Dr. Polis goes on to critique the study I put on by Camatini and Tong.
A good solid study of visual processing in the brain. However, what's lacking is any kind of subjective input. The authors did not themselves say how subjectivity informed their own perception of what was going on, nor, if you read the methods section, did they ask their subjects for their subjective reactions, their awareness of what was happening. In fact, the entire study was done objectively.
If Dr. Polis bothered to read to the end of the study, under the section Mind Reading of Attended Orientation, he'd understand that. Camatini and Tong tested whether they could determine a subject's mental state given information of their brain states. This is exactly what people who propose a non-physical aspect to the mind generally say is impossible.
HonestDiscussioner is shooting at the wrong target. I've never said that our brain state is not related to what we're attending to. In fact, I believe it does reflect what we're attending to when we're dealing with sensory inputs and many other subjects. So, HonestDiscussioner is shooting at a target which certainly is not me. If he had watched my video about the two-subsystem mind, or if he had understood it if he did watch it, he would see that my concept is not at all what he is aiming at.
Under Polis's two-mind subsystem theory, the only way to study the mind and its subjective contents is through introspection. If we can study the mind through other objective means, like we do in the Camatini and Tong study, this contradicts his theory.
As I intimated earlier, HonestDiscussioner seems not to bother researching what he criticizes. Let's take a look at what my two-subsystem theory of mind actually says. First, I pointed out that our thought has two aspects. It has content, and it has awareness of content. Without both, we don't have a thought. Then I said that the first subsystem, which is our neurophysiology, obviously processes the content. But processing the content is not sufficient to give rise to thought, so we need a second subsystem, an intentional subsystem, to provide us with awareness. Obviously, when we're attending to something, we need to represent it neurophysiologically, just as Camatini and Tong found. If it were not already clear enough, I made it explicit that the appropriate way of studying the neural representations of the contents we are aware of is by using the methods of neuroscience. I also made it clear that introspection is the appropriate method for studying awareness.
So to counter, Dr. Polis tries to make it to falsify the claim that the only way to study the subjective is introspection, you must use introspection? The entire point of this is to show that we don't need to ask a subject about their subjective awareness. We can look into the brain and figure it out ourselves.
As with many naturalists, HonestDiscussioner just doesn't get it. To help him get it, I'm going to use a picture of the Cartesian theater. The Cartesian theater is a concept developed by Daniel Dennett in order to illustrate our common experience-driven understanding of mind. I don't really believe that there is such a thing as the Cartesian theater, but it does serve to illustrate the elements necessary for a theory of mind to be adequate to our experience. In the Cartesian theater, there are two elements. There is a presentation illustrated by the screen and the speakers, which is the content I've been discussing, and there is an observer, the so-called homunculus, who illustrates our awareness of the presented content. Now let's look at the experiment that HonestDiscussioner has been bringing up. What it does effectively is put a camera into the Cartesian theater, and it takes a picture of the screen. HonestDiscussioner believes that taking a picture of the screen is the same as taking a picture of the subject. Of course it isn't, and the illustration clearly shows this. If we understood the complete brain state, we would still know absolutely nothing about awareness. It is only because of our own awareness and other people telling us of their internal experience of awareness that we know that such a thing as awareness exists. No one has ever found awareness in the data of neuroscience. We might be able to tell that this information or that information is what is being focused upon, what is being attended to, but we would not know that it is in fact the subject of awareness.
Next, he talks about my point that Dr. Damian Cruz states we are able to measure subjective awareness.
What Cruz, Monty, and Owen are pointing out is that functional magnetic resonance imaging allows us to detect awareness. Awareness can be detected by asking them to control various brain functions. For example, you could ask a patient to visualize an image. If the patient then excites the visual cortex, you know that he's responding to that command. So what is going on here is no different in principle than asking a person to wave their hand.
Now, I'm just going to come out and say it. He's right. He pointed out that we're only measuring the byproduct of subjective awareness. We're not actually directly measuring it. It really isn't much different than asking someone to raise their hand and watching them do it to see if they are aware. I withdraw that point.
In fact, this study confirms my model because it shows that awareness is able to control the brain just as I have posited it.
What? Wait, huh? Dr. Polis is again engaging in a leap in logic, something he seems quite fond of. While Cruz's experiments do not disconfirm his theory, they don't confirm it either. The person is not doing anything different than they normally would. They just can't move their body.
Here's where Honest Discussioner's preconceptions get the best of him. I'm not proposing that the two-subsystem mind operates only in exceptional circumstances. It's not a miracle. It's not, as he would say, magical. The normal operation of the mind consists of an interaction between our intentional aspect, our intellect and our will, and the brain, which acts as an interface to control the body on the one hand and to provide us with sensory input on the other. The brain processes data, but it normally does so under the control of our intentionality. We decide what we want to think about. We decide how we want to move.
The subjectivity is the data.
This, of course, is complete nonsense. Subjectivity is not the data. If subjectivity were the data, then whenever we had neural representations of data in the brain, there would be subjectivity, there would be awareness. But in fact, we know that there are many processes which go on subconsciously. We're unaware, for example, of how the data that comes from the cilia in our ear is translated into the qualia of sound. There is data. There is no awareness, and so data is not subjectivity.
In the comments section, he said directly that science has no data on the mind.
Yes, I was not sufficiently precise here. The reason was that I assumed that people with a scholarly attitude would not take one sentence out of context. If we look closer at what was said, we see that we were discussing the subjectivity, and that I used mind as an abbreviation for the subjective aspect of the mind as opposed to the combination of brain and awareness.
The Camentinian tongue study did not abstract away from the knowing subject. What the subject was aware of was the data. You can no longer say, Dr. Polis, that science always abstracts away data on subjective awareness.
Apparently, Honest Discussioner doesn't understand what abstraction means. Abstraction requires more than the presence of some reality. It requires more than the person who is being aware being present while the experiment is being conducted. In order for awareness not to be abstracted away from, it needs to be consciously fixed upon. As I stated earlier when we read the methods section of this paper, we find no method which fixes upon the awareness of the subject. Therefore, I am completely justified in saying that it is abstracted away.
You see, there is a good amount of evidence to suggest that we will one day achieve this physical model of consciousness.
This is another typical naturalist faith statement. As far as I know, there is absolutely no evidence of any progress on the core issue of explaining consciousness in physical terms. The problem has been worked on for almost 400 years, and no progress has been made. In the previous video, he admitted that when we started, we didn't have the tools to do this, and we still don't have the tools to do this. If there is evidence to support his claim, then let him present it. Consciousness, however, is as perplexing as it ever was. It still seems utterly mysterious that the causation of behavior should be accompanied by a subjective inner life. Skipping ahead, present-day scientific theories hardly touch the really difficult questions about consciousness. We do not just lack a detailed theory. We are entirely in the dark about how consciousness fits into the natural order.
This is by far the worst, and by worst I mean the most unskillful use of quote mining I've ever seen. Let me throw that back up there. Anyone notice anything? How about that middle section that Polis didn't read or highlight? The first part of that sentence, we have good reason to believe that consciousness arises from physical systems such as brains.
If I were quote mining, I certainly wouldn't have copied the entire text and put it on the screen for anyone to read. The reason that I brought this text up was not to mine a quote, but to answer HonestDiscussioner's question about where it was that Chalmers said that we made no progress toward a model of consciousness. Chalmers was very clear on this point, and HonestDiscussioner seemed totally unable to comprehend it. Now he's changing the subject from the fact that we've made no progress whatsoever to a sentence which I skipped over because I didn't think it was important to the issue that was immediately at hand. Let me address it. Here's the slide I used. If we read the entire section that I skipped over, we'll see that most of it supports my point, and that the person who is quote mining is actually HonestDiscussioner. We have good reason to believe that consciousness arises from physical systems such as brains, but we have little idea how it arises or why it exists at all. How could a physical system such as a brain also be an experiencer? Why should there be something it is like to be such a system? It turns out that this good reason is nothing more than the faith statement of a naturalist. When we speak of having a good reason for A causing B, it's usually because we see A causing B, or we understand how A could cause B, or something of that sort. In this case, neither of those applies. He says explicitly we have little idea of how it arises, so we don't understand any causation, or why it exists at all. If we don't understand why it exists at all, how is it that we have good reason? What we have here is one believer relying on the testimony of another. The reason that I quoted Chalmers to begin with is because Chalmers is a hostile witness. So when Chalmers says that we are entirely in the dark about how consciousness fits into the natural order, we can be certain that it's true.
While we don't know how that is the case, we have good reason to believe that it is the case. Similar to gravity, we have good reason to believe that masses pull towards each other, but we don't understand the how and why this is the case. And now, according to Dr. Polis, I guess we can in fact substitute intelligent falling in for gravity, since we don't understand the how.
This is one of the lamest analogies I've ever encountered. In gravity we have things which are measurable and correlated. There is a proven correlation between the mass and separation of falling bodies and their acceleration. All of these things are physically observable. In the case of the mind, we have awareness which cannot be physically measured, and which is only available in the first-person projection as an internal experience. And we have a conjecture that the brain causes this. HonestDiscussioner frankly admits that we don't know how. The dispute between HonestDiscussioner and myself is precisely about the how. HonestDiscussioner is convinced with no evidence whatsoever that the how is a function of the brain. So, the question here is not about the existence or non-existence of an effect, as it would be as if I were denying gravity, but precisely about how the effect is attained. I read someone saying that we are entirely in the dark. I think it's reasonable to paraphrase that by saying that we've made no progress.
Sure. After a year after Chalmers proposed the hard problem,
HonestDiscussioner seems to have a very poor understanding of the history of the philosophy of mind. Chalmers did not, quote, propose the hard problem, unquote. What Chalmers did was identify the fact that the progress which naturalists claim to have made on the philosophy of mind was not progress on the so-called hard problem. The hard problem had been around since the time of Hobbes, at least, perhaps before. So it was not proposed 15 years ago, but hundreds of years ago, and in all of that time no progress has been made. Having been unable to read down to the bottom of the first page of Chalmers' book, HonestDiscussioner thought that he ought to email Chalmers himself and see what he had to say.
Hi, I don't think I've made the zero progress claim. I think we've made minor progress around the edges, both in the science and the philosophy, in getting clearer on various issues, in understanding various strategies for reductionists and non-reductionists alike.
We have to interpret these remarks in the context of what Chalmers actually wrote. If being in the dark is not zero progress, so be it. Imagine that you had contracted to have a building constructed, and you go and talk to the architect and ask what progress has been made. Of course, there's no building, but the architect tells you that he's toured Europe and Asia seeking out new strategies for building. Is this progress toward building? Well, in some vague sense it is. Is the building actually under construction? Are there plans for how to construct it? No, there aren't. So if we interpret progress as progress on the core issue, there is no progress. And Chalmers' email confirms that.
Dr. Bose seems fond of both selectively ignoring information he doesn't like and pretending the last 15 years haven't happened.
Well, I certainly haven't been ignoring what's happened for the last 15 years. I've been looking for models of consciousness on a regular basis. Quantum models of consciousness, neurophysiological models of consciousness, artificial intelligence models of consciousness, and so on. I haven't found one that works or looks like it's going to work. If HonestDiscussioner thinks that there has been progress toward a model, all he needs to do is outline what the approach is and what progress has been made. As far as I can tell, and I've looked diligently, there is no progress.
Dr. Chalmers didn't just recently say we're entirely in the dark. He said 15 years ago we don't know how consciousness fits into the natural order. Now, without access to Chalmers' book, which was the reason I didn't see that quote, this seems strange to me, and I couldn't find this anywhere in Chalmers' work.
As I said earlier, HonestDiscussioner seems to make statements without researching them. Earlier he told us that he could not find the quote in question, and now he tells us that in fact he didn't look. Apparently he doesn't even know that there are such things as libraries where important books can be found.
Polis ignored the part of the email in which Chalmers said we've gotten clearer on various issues, not just that we've developed new strategies. This is indeed progress, and Chalmers himself says we have made progress.
HonestDiscussioner seems more interested in semantic games about what is and is not progress than about engaging on substantive issues. If he thinks that there is progress, let him tell me what it is, and we can discuss it. If he's not able to do that, then we can conclude that there is no progress.
You don't get to interpret a comment he made in 2011 by work he did in 1996.
Apparently, HonestDiscussioner has never heard of establishing a baseline. Chalmers established as a baseline that we are completely in the dark about how to reduce consciousness to physical causes. Chalmers' subsequent statements on the same topic have to be compared to the baseline. Unless he says that we are no longer in the dark, we can assume that he is sticking by what he originally said in the baseline, that we are in the dark. Making progress around the edges, better understanding the issues and so on, does not give us a plan for developing a model of consciousness based on physical operations. Until this is done, we remain in the dark. The rest of this video on the two-subsystem mind goes on to present evidence-based arguments. HonestDiscussioner seems either unwilling or unable to deal with these arguments because he skipped them.
I looked over number 21, and he gave no such evidence. He mentioned that brain scans show no particular region activated through consciousness, and he described how his model works. If there was evidence in that video, it was nothing but an argument from ignorance.
In a long, reasoned, and careful analysis, Dennett shows that no naturalist model can represent the elements present in experience. As a scientist, I've been trained to value data above theory. And so, if the data does not agree with naturalism, we have no choice but to consider naturalism falsified and reject it. In order to account for the two elements of thought, we need a data processing subsystem, which is the brain, and an intentional subsystem, which is responsible for awareness.
In my video, I pointed out that Dr. Polis believes free will is derived from our intentionality, being able to warp the laws of nature, thus affecting the neurons in our brain. He cites a meta-analysis or two that tries to show that random number generators and dice throws can be affected by thoughts. I'm paraphrasing. But now, I said that I hoped these studies were true, because if they were, it would utterly destroy free will, not to mention his entire theory. If I can use my intentionality to control the neurons in my brain, we can do that to anyone else. I pointed out that he contradicted himself in the comments section by saying affecting isn't controlling, even though the basis for his entire point is that we can control our actions by affecting 1 out of every 10,000 neurons. So, Polis's response to all this? Behold.
I haven't got time in this video to deal with all of the nonsense which HonestDiscussioner brings up. The main problem, however, is that HonestDiscussioner is unwilling to accept scientific studies. I backed up my claim that our intentions can control our behavior by looking at the results of over 1,000 studies published in psychology and physics journals.
Yep. His response was to go over the study again and show why it is true, and go over how meta-analysis works. So to summarize, he didn't have time to go over a point that undermined his entire theory, but he did have time to go over the same part of his video that I showed and to talk for almost 2 minutes on the merits of meta-analysis in response to a minor comment I made.
When OpenDiscussioner's comments are proved to be utter and complete nonsense, they become demoted to the status of minor. When I don't deal with them, then they're promoted to the status of major and decisive. Let's look at this so-called minor comment.
Of course, the studies he does cite are really questionable at best. The use of meta-analysis to prove a point is actually a bit shady. Usually they're only used to direct further research.
This, of course, is utter and complete nonsense. Virtually every physical constant has had its value determined by meta-analysis. Meta-analysis, of course, is a standard technique used throughout the natural sciences. For example, in Bornstein's book, we read on page 312, meta-analysis methods have a long history in the field of physics.
So, I'll give you the meta-analysis, Dr. Polis. For the sake of argument, for the moment, I'll say your study is totally valid. Congratulations. You've undermined, if not destroyed, your entire theory.
I didn't deal with this argument because it's so weak that I didn't want to embarrass him further. But since HonestDiscussioner insists upon being embarrassed, let me go ahead. He doesn't understand what a system is. A television, for example, is a system. All of the parts are integrated. However, if you put another device near it, which can receive radio waves, it will receive waves generated by the television set. If you put another television set next to it, if it's not properly shielded, it might even get some signals from the first set. That does not mean that the picture on the second set is going to be controlled by the picture on the first set. Systems have a certain degree of integration. The intentional part of my humanity controls the physical part of my humanity, and it may have the side effect of affecting but not controlling objects around me. And, in fact, the meta-analyses which I cited showed that we do have the ability to affect in a minor way other physical systems. That does not mean that we control them. When we affect a random number generator, for example, its basic physics continues intact. The radioactive material in it still follows more or less a pattern of exponential decay, but with minor variations. These minor variations affect but do not control the process. I will not respond in kind to his accusation that I was dishonest. I think it's best forgotten. I only have two things to say about his comments on my video 15. The first is that apparently he has no sense of humor and can't recognize parody when he sees it. And the second is that having missed the parody entirely, when I come to the serious argument, he doesn't address that either. So, he missed the point on both counts.
I understood it was parody. Dr. Polis pointed out that since a rock didn't poof out of existence, and to avoid an infinite regress, we'd need a law that preserves laws, and itself. Then he jumps to saying that the law is called God. I said this was a leap in logic. Nothing about this says that the self-preserving law was conscious. Polis responded in the comments, saying he wasn't trying to prove God was personal, only that he exists. Well, except for the fact that in his video Polis says God himself, not some abstract version that isn't necessarily conscious. The comment itself shows Polis is full of it. If he wasn't trying to prove a personal God, he wouldn't have used the personalized words for God, capital G in God and capital H in He. The God he was talking about was personal, and if it wasn't, then he has no business calling it God.
HonestDiscussioner is confusing two things. The first is what I tried to prove in video 15, taken in isolation. In video 15, I proved that there was something which maintains the laws of nature in existence, as well as itself, and, through the laws, all material reality. It is certainly reasonable to call something which maintains all of reality in existence God. Whether you want to consider God to be personal or not, whether you want to consider God to be a mind or not, is a separate question. But it is not a question which I left unaddressed in the entire series of my videos. I had previously shown that the laws of nature were intentional. And, in subsequent videos, I showed that evolution had well-defined targets, and that these targets were demonstrated in many different ways. So if the laws themselves are intentional, and if their effects evidence predefined targets, then it's clear that that which maintains the laws in being, their origin, as it were, has intelligence. To conclude, it's clear that HonestDiscussioner really is upset about having his faith questioned. That reason applied to science leads to very different conclusions than those allowed by his belief system is terribly disturbing to him, so disturbing that he feels it necessary to launch personal attacks against me. I have no animosity toward the man, but I think that he ought to get his emotions under control. I sincerely wish him peace.